The cafeteria buzzed with the rhythm of routine, clattering trays, the low hum of conversation, the smell of reheated food lingering in the air. Amid the noise, 3 new trainees moved with the careless energy of youth, laughing too loudly, their confidence feeding on attention. They noticed her sitting alone at the far end of the room, the quiet woman who never joined their banter. Something about her composure, too calm, too self-contained, irked them. They mistook her stillness for weakness, and weakness, to them, was an open invitation. One smirked. Another whispered something crude. The third, emboldened, stepped closer. She didn't flinch. Her eyes lifted, steady and unreadable, the kind of gaze that measured distance, not emotion. The trainee grinned and leaned in, hand on the edge of her table. "Relax," he said teasingly. The room's noise seemed to fade. She spoke softly, almost kindly. "You don't want to do that." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he laughed, brushing off her warning, until she shifted, just slightly, her body realigning with quiet precision. The air changed. Something invisible yet unmistakable rippled through the space, and in that instant, everyone understood. She wasn't the one cornered. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second to like this video, subscribe for more stories that reveal the power behind silence, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Every office has someone like her, the quiet one, the ghost between meetings. Sarah arrived each morning at exactly 8:45, not a minute early, not a second late. She greeted the receptionist with a polite smile, logged in, and sank into her work with mechanical precision. No idle chatter, no coffee breaks spent gossiping by the vending machine. At lunch, she always chose the same corner table, alone, earbuds in, eyes fixed on a paperback novel no one ever managed to glimpse the title of. People noticed her silence before they noticed her competence. Some thought she was shy, others whispered that she was standoffish. "She's nice, just distant," they'd say, shrugging it off as social awkwardness. In the world of open offices and oversharing, quiet people make others uncomfortable. Sarah didn't seem to mind. Her movements were deliberate, never rushed, never hesitant. Every gesture felt, measured, as if she was always aware of the exact amount of space she occupied. There was something unsettling about her calm, though no one could say why. The way she observed rather than reacted. The way her eyes, calm and unwavering, seemed to take in more than anyone realized. Some coworkers joked she was probably ex-military or in witness protection. She'd just smile faintly when she overheard them. That same composed half-smile that revealed nothing. But the truth was simpler and infinitely more complicated. Because Sarah wasn't hiding from people. She was hiding from the life she had already survived. It started small, the kind of juvenile teasing that barely registered to most people. The 3 new trainees sat a few tables away, their laughter carrying a little too easily across the cafeteria. On the first day, it was just whispers and side glances. By the second, they'd started making jokes loud enough for Sarah to hear, about how she always ate alone, how she probably went home to her cats, how she was too uptight to have fun. She didn't react, didn't flinch. Silence, after all, was something she had mastered long ago. By the third day, that silence became their invitation. People like them feed on reactions, and when they don't get one, they escalate. So they moved closer. One of them, tall, confident in that reckless way only the inexperienced can be, dropped his tray beside hers. "Mind if we sit?" he asked, already pulling out the chair. His friend smirked, sensing a show. Sarah didn't look up. "Actually, I do," she said softly. Her tone wasn't rude, just factual. That made them laugh harder. Another leaned in, close enough for her to feel the heat of his breath. "Come on, don't be like that. We're just trying to be friendly." His hand brushed the edge of her tray, a small motion, careless but deliberate. Her fork stopped midair. For the first time, she looked up. Her gaze met his, calm, unblinking, surgical. The noise of the cafeteria seemed to fade around them, as if the air itself recognized a boundary had been crossed. A woman 2 tables away shifted uncomfortably. Someone else looked up, sensing the tension but choosing not to interfere. The trainees didn't notice. They mistook stillness for weakness, the oldest mistake there is. And in that fragile pause before everything changed, Sarah said quietly, "You don't want to do that." The moment unfolded with a quiet inevitability, like a wave cresting before it breaks. The trainee laughed again, reaching out as if to reclaim the dominance he thought he had. But Sarah moved first. Not fast, precise. Her hand caught his wrist midair, her fingers locking around the joint with practiced efficiency. There was no sound except the soft scrape of his chair as he froze in disbelief. She didn't squeeze, didn't twist, just held him there, suspended between arrogance and understanding. I said, she repeated, her voice low but carrying through the cafeteria, don't. The tone wasn't angry. It was the kind of calm that came from control, absolute, unshakable control. The kind that didn't need to prove anything. Around them, the clatter of trays and conversation stopped. Even the air felt still, charged with the realization that something unexpected was happening. The trainee's friend stared, unsure whether to laugh or step back. A supervisor appeared at the edge of the crowd, eyes narrowing as he tried to assess the situation. Is everything all right here? He asked cautiously. Sarah released the trainee's wrist and stepped back, her composure unbroken. Everything's fine, she said simply, adjusting her sleeve as if brushing off a bit of lint. What's your problem? One of the trainees blurted, voice higher now, defensive. But before Sarah could answer, someone from another table whispered, she's former Navy. Heads turned. SEAL, another voice corrected. The word cut through the silence like a blade. And just like that, the hierarchy in the room flipped. The same people who had dismissed her seconds ago now looked at her with something closer to awe or fear. The quiet woman no one noticed had just reminded everyone that still water runs deepest. By the time Sarah returned to her desk, the cafeteria incident had already taken on a life of its own. She could feel it in the way people looked at her, the glances that lingered too long, the sudden hush that fell whenever she passed. Whispers followed her through the corridors like shadows. In one version, she'd broken the trainee's wrist. In another, she'd flipped him over the table. Every retelling added a little more drama, a little less truth. By the afternoon, HR had called her in. The tone was polite, procedural, and layered with discomfort. We just need to document what happened, they said, carefully avoiding any phrasing that might imply blame. The trainees, she learned, had been reprimanded, formally warned and temporarily suspended. But that did little to quiet the chatter spreading through the building. People were fascinated, half afraid, half impressed. You know she was a SEAL? Someone whispered near the elevators. That can't be true, another replied. But their voice carried that hint of uncertainty that turns rumor into legend. At her desk, the silence that had once been her comfort now felt like exposure. Every time someone walked by, she could sense the unspoken thoughts behind their polite smiles. Admiration, maybe. Fear, definitely. A few coworkers tried to strike up conversation, the same people who'd ignored her for months, but their tone had changed. There was reverence now, an awkward respect that created more distance than connection. For years, Sarah had built her civilian life around invisibility. It was supposed to be simple, anonymous. But now, anonymity was gone, replaced by an uneasy spotlight she never asked for. In the span of one lunch break, her quiet sanctuary had become a stage, and everyone was watching. The next morning, Sarah's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, she thought it was work, another meeting, another follow-up from HR. But when she saw the number of notifications lighting up her screen, her stomach dropped. Someone had filmed the cafeteria incident. Not just filmed it, uploaded it. And by the time she opened the first link, it had already been shared hundreds of thousands of times. The title alone made her feel sick. Female SEAL humiliates trainees in epic cafeteria showdown. The video showed shaky footage of her standing, calm and composed, while the trainees stumbled over their own arrogance. But the comments underneath told a different story, twisted, exaggerated, torn apart by people who didn't know her and never would. Some called her a hero. Others called her a liar. The internet had taken a moment of self-control and turned it into entertainment. By noon, her inbox was flooded. Old teammates she hadn't spoken to in years were sending messages, some offering support, others just stunned that her name was trending. Reporters had somehow found her address, camping outside her apartment building, hoping for a quote, a reaction, a headline. Her company's PR team issued a statement, but it only fueled more speculation. Sarah sat on her couch, watching the views climb. 2 million, then 5, then 10. Each number felt like a new invasion, a fresh piece of herself stripped away. What had been a quiet moment of dignity had become a public spectacle. She had lived through missions that were classified, invisible, forgotten by design. But this was the one battle she hadn't trained for, the war of exposure in a world that never stops watching. That evening, as the media storm raged outside her apartment, Sarah's phone rang again. But this time, it wasn't a reporter. The number was familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. She hesitated before answering. Lieutenant Dawson, the voice said, steady, deliberate. Her old commanding officer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence carried the weight of years, of missions unspoken and loyalties never forgotten. I saw the footage, he finally said. You didn't break cover. The world did. His tone wasn't judgmental, just matter of fact. The way soldiers talked about things they couldn't control. You remember what we used to say, right? Adapt. Overcome. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Those words had guided her through darker places than this. But somehow, they hit differently now. You represent something bigger than yourself, Sarah, he continued. Not the headlines. Not the noise. What you did, staying calm, controlled. That's the part they won't understand, but they'll feel it. That's what leadership looks like, even when no one recognizes it. His words carried both reassurance and challenge. When the call ended, Sarah sat in the quiet, letting the conversation sink in. The fear that had gripped her for days began to shift into something else, resolve. Maybe she couldn't stop the story, but she could choose what it meant. For the first time since the incident, she looked up from her phone and smiled faintly. The mission had changed. The mindset hadn't. Sarah had spent days avoiding cameras, ignoring calls, and watching strangers define her story for her. But something shifted after that conversation with Dawson. She realized silence wasn't peace anymore. It was surrender. So when a respected journalist reached out, promising one fair interview, she said yes. Not to defend herself, not to reclaim attention, but to reclaim truth. When the lights came on in the studio, she sat straight but relaxed, her voice steady. People think what happened in that cafeteria was aggression, she began. It wasn't. It was discipline. There's a difference. The interviewer tried to press, to find controversy in her calmness, but Sarah didn't bite. Every answer was measured, grounded in the same quiet strength that had once been mistaken for fragility. Strength doesn't have to be loud, she said simply. And control isn't weakness. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do is stay calm when everything in you wants to react. The segment aired that night. Within hours, it was everywhere, but not like before. This time, people weren't mocking or speculating. They were listening. The clip spread across social media with captions like, "This is what real composure looks like," and "Discipline, redefined." For the first time, Sarah's story wasn't being told for her. It was being understood. She hadn't fought to prove her strength. She'd shown it. And in doing so, she turned noise into meaning, chaos into clarity, exposure into purpose. Months passed, and the story that once burned through the internet like wildfire began to cool into something steadier, something meaningful. The headlines faded, the speculation died down, but Sarah's name didn't vanish. Instead, it began appearing in places she never expected. Conference agendas, leadership workshops, veteran summits. Everyone wanted her to speak, to tell her version of courage, to translate that quiet moment in the cafeteria into something people could learn from. At first, she said no. She didn't want to become a symbol. She hadn't acted for applause, and she had no interest in fame dressed up as inspiration. But eventually, she accepted one invitation, a small leadership event for young veterans transitioning into civilian life. The room was modest, filled with the kind of people who carried invisible stories behind calm faces. When she stepped onto the stage, there was no music, no dramatic lighting, just silence, the kind she'd always found peace in. She spoke for less than 5 minutes. Courage, she said, isn't about confrontation. It's about composure. It's about staying grounded when you're tested, and remembering that strength doesn't always need to be seen to be real. The words weren't rehearsed, but they landed like truth often does, softly, yet undeniably. Afterward, people didn't swarm her for photos or autographs. They just nodded, quiet, understanding, grateful. For many, she'd become proof that being underestimated could be a gift, not a curse. That restraint could be power. And somewhere in that moment, Sarah realized that what began as humiliation had transformed into legacy. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, like the calm before the storm or the silence after it. The kind of legacy that doesn't fade, because it lives in those who felt unseen and now know their quiet strength matters. The office looked the same as always: fluorescent lights, quiet keyboards, the low hum of routine. Sarah walked through it unnoticed, just as she had before. No whispers now, no glances. The story had run its course, the internet had moved on. And that was fine. She didn't need recognition. She'd already reclaimed something far more valuable: peace. As she stepped outside, the late afternoon light caught her just right, soft and golden, the kind of light that doesn't demand attention but fills the moment with quiet truth. She paused for a second, taking it in, then kept walking, calm, steady, unremarkable to anyone watching, but entirely in control of her world again. The voiceover lingers, almost a whisper. You never know who you're dealing with. Some wars are fought in silence. And sometimes, the strongest people you'll ever meet are the ones who never have to prove it.